The frozen passenger, it was the kind of winter night that made every noise sound sharper, like the cold itself carried echoes. I was driving through northern Montana just after midnight on December 28th, heading home from my aunt's after Christmas. A blizzard had rolled in faster than the weather app warned, and the two-lane highway was buried under drifting snow. My phone had no signal, the car heater barely worked, and I was 30 miles from the nearest exit. The only light came from my high beams cutting through white sheets of snow. Every few minutes, the tires would skid, and I'd tighten my grip on the wheel. I wasn't supposed to be out there, but I'd convinced myself that pushing through the storm would save me a hotel bill. I regretted it about 10 minutes in. Around 1 in the morning, the snowfall thickened until it felt like driving inside a snow globe. Then my headlights caught a shape on the shoulder of a person. At first I thought it was just a trick of the storm, but the shape didn't vanish. It was a man standing on the edge of the highway, facing the woods. He wore a dark parka and jeans, no gloves, no hat. Just standing there, shoulders hunched, as the snow piled around him. I slowed, rolled down my window a crack, and shouted, "Hey, you okay?" No answer. The wind swallowed my voice. When I pulled closer, my headlights fell on his face pale, almost bluish. His eyes were open but unfocused. I couldn't tell if he was alive. Then, as I leaned closer to the window, his head turned toward me. The motion was slow, mechanical. He blinked once, then raised his arm and pointed down the road, toward nothing but darkness. My chest tightened. I should have kept going. Every survival instinct screamed at me to drive, but there was something hypnotic about how still he was. I stopped the car. I stepped out, instantly hit by freezing air. The snow was halfway to my knees. "Sir," I yelled again. Still nothing. I reached for his shoulder. The moment my glove brushed the fabric, he exhaled a long, shaky breath like someone waking from a nightmare. "Car broke down," he rasped. "Can you give me a ride?" His voice was barely human from the cold, but it was a voice. I couldn't just leave him there. He climbed into the passenger seat, moving stiffly, like every joint hurt. Snowflakes melted on his skin, but didn't seem to warm him. "What happened to your car?" I asked. He just stared forward, ran out of gas, been walking. "How long?" He turned to me, eyes hollow. "Since yesterday," I swallowed. "You mean you've been out here for a full day?" He didn't answer. I told myself he was in shock, maybe. The car filled with a smell faintly metallic, like pennies and wet earth. We drove in silence for a while. The heater wind. The man kept glancing at the side mirror, then at the rear window, as though something was following us. "You said you're heading toward Deerfield," I asked. He nodded. "My wife's there. She'll be worried." I knew the name. Deerfield was about 15 miles east or had been. My dad used to tell me it burned down in the 1980s, after a gas explosion. I assumed he meant the outskirts still had homes. Maybe he lived near there. But when I looked at the GPS, the map was blank, just snowfields. "You sure it's Deerfield?" I asked. He didn't respond, just kept muttering something under his breath. I caught fragments. "She's waiting. Can't keep her waiting." I decided to drop him off at the next open gas station or rest stop. Only there weren't any. Every turnoff was buried in snow. At some point, he started humming, low, tuneless, rhythmic. It sounded like a child trying to remember a lullaby. About 20 minutes later, my headlights caught another shape ahead, an old road sign, nearly toppled. I slowed to read it through the snow. Deerfield to 2 miles. My breath fogged the windshield. I glanced at the man. His expression hadn't changed, but tears were sliding down his cheeks, freezing before they reached his chin. "You okay?" I asked. He whispered, "Almost home." The road narrowed, then split into a smaller lane buried in snow. He pointed down it without looking at me. "Turn here." Against my better judgment, I did. The road led into a patch of woods. Branches scraped the roof. After a few minutes, I saw faint lights ahead, warm orange glows scattered like candles in the dark. At first, I thought it was a small village. Then the shapes came into focus. Collapsed buildings, burnt roofs, and broken windows half buried in snow. The lights weren't lamps, they were fires flickering inside ruined houses. I stopped the car. "What is this?" He smiled weakly. "Home." He opened the door before I could stop him and trudged toward the ruins. I followed, calling after him, "Sir, wait." When I reached the first house, the front wall was gone. Inside, old furniture sat frozen in place, covered in frost. A calendar on the wall read December 1984. The man walked inside like he knew every step. He stopped in front of a blackened fireplace, knelt, and whispered, "I made it back." Then he looked at me and said, "Thank you for bringing me." I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but the room went suddenly colder. My breath came out in heavy plumes. The man's skin turned ashen, his eyes clouded, and before I could move, he slumped forward onto the floor. I rushed to him. His body was stiff, frozen solid. I backed away, heart pounding. Outside, the fires were flickering out one by one. I stumbled to the car and started the engine, ready to leave that place behind. But when I looked up, something was standing in the road, a head tall, thin, motionless. Not the man. Something else. Its outline was human but wrong, too long, too dark against the snow. It just stood there as I slammed the gear into reverse. My tires spun uselessly. The thing took one slow step toward the car, then another. I hit the gas again and felt the wheels finally catch. The car lurched backward down the path, out of the woods, onto the highway. When I finally reached the main road, I didn't stop driving until the storm cleared and I saw lights from a distant diner. I called the sheriff's department that morning, told them where I'd found the man and what I'd seen. They searched the area. A deputy called me later that day. He said there was no sign of any living person or a recent fire, but they did find something odd. Near the remains of the old Deerfield settlement, they discovered a rusted pickup truck half buried in snow. Inside was a driver's license belonging to Michael Harding. Missing since December 28, 1984, when they showed me his photo, my stomach dropped. It was the man I'd picked up on the highway. They told me Deerfield had burned down exactly 40 years ago to the day. Gas explosion. Dozens dead, including a man found frozen in the woods trying to make it back home. I don't drive at night anymore, especially not in winter. Sometimes, when the snow gets heavy, I see movement on the shoulder and feel that same urge to stop. But I don't. I keep driving, because now I know some people never really make it home, and sometimes, if you're not careful, they'll ask you for a ride anyway.
Story 2. A true crime style account of a winter stalker. I used to love winter. The sound of snow falling, the quiet streets, the way everything slowed down. That changed 5 years ago when I spent a week alone in my family's cabin up in northern Washington, a place I never gone back to since. It started simple. I needed space after a breakup. My parents owned a small cabin in the mountains, off a forest road that barely showed up on GPS. No Wi-Fi, no phone signal, just a wood stove, some canned food and a landline for emergencies. I thought the isolation would help me think. Instead, it showed me how fragile safe really is. The first 2 days were peaceful. I read, cooked simple meals, walked in the snow. The world felt small and quiet. But on the third night, I noticed something strange. Around 11 p.m., I heard footsteps outside, slow, crunching in the snow. At first, I assumed it was an elk or a neighbor. But when I peered through the frosted window, I didn't see anyone, just the dark tree line and my breath fogging the glass. The steps stopped, then started again, circling the cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it outside. Nothing. The trees swayed gently, their branches dripping snow. I told myself it was an animal and forced myself to go to bed. The next morning, I found footprints in the snow outside the door. Not paw prints, boots. They led from the woods to my front steps, then circled the cabin twice before disappearing back toward the trees. The steps were small, light, but definitely human. I checked the landline to call the ranger station, but it was dead. I didn't panic yet. Lines went down out there all the time. I decided to wait until morning to drive down the mountain and report it. I spent that day on edge, glancing at the windows every few minutes. Nothing happened. By nightfall, I convinced myself it was someone passing through, maybe a hiker who got lost. That night, I locked every door, shoved a chair under the knob, and fell asleep with the wood stove burning. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of whistling, a soft, tuneless melody coming from outside my window. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either, just drifting through the trees. Then came the crunch of footsteps, slow, deliberate. Snow creaked under each step. I turned off the lamp and sat still, heart pounding. The whistling stopped. For a long time, there was only silence. Then, 3 gentle knocks on the wall.
At the door?
At the wall. Just below the window where I slept. I froze. Whoever it was, they were inches away from my head, separated by nothing but old wood and glass. When I finally found the courage to peek through the curtain, there was no one there. Only the faint outline of more footprints, fresh ones. By sunrise, I was done pretending it was nothing. I packed a bag, grabbed the car keys, and went outside. But my car wouldn't start. The hood was open. The battery was gone. I sprinted back inside, locked the door, and shoved the couch in front of it. My brain was racing. No phone, no car, no help. Just miles of frozen forest. Round noon, I heard the whistling again. It came from deeper in the woods this time. I stayed inside and tried not to move. The whistling grew fainter until it was gone completely. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I found something new. Nailed to a tree outside the cabin was a small piece of paper, half soaked by snow. In black marker, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words: "I found you." I ripped it down and bolted the door. I started the wood stove again, even though I was afraid the smoke would attract him. Every sound, every creak, made my skin crawl. That night, it wasn't whistling. It was talking, a man's voice, quiet and slurred, mumbling something I couldn't make out. I pressed my ear to the door. The words came clearer. "You looked right at me last night." My stomach dropped. He laughed, soft and slow, and after a long pause whispered, "Open the door." I didn't move, didn't breathe. The handle rattled once, then again, then silence. I sat there until dawn, gripping the fireplace poker like a weapon. When light finally came, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the window facing the woods, written in fog from the inside, were the words, "Too late," from the inside. That's when I realized something terrifying. He'd been inside before. I tore through every room looking for signs. In the crawl space under the floorboards, I found food wrappers, a lighter, and a small blanket, like someone had been sleeping down there. I slammed it shut and didn't open it again. I lasted one more night before deciding to leave on foot. I waited until morning, packed my backpack, and stepped outside. The footprints were gone, covered by fresh snow. For the first time in days, the forest was silent. Half a mile down the road, I saw a pickup truck pulled halfway into a ditch. A ranger sat inside. I ran up, waving my arms, nearly crying. He got out, confused, asked what happened. I told him everything, the footsteps, the whistling, the writing. He nodded slowly. "You're not the first to report something like that," he said. "Someone's been living out here for years. Never caught him. Only comes out in the winter." When we got back to the cabin, there was one last thing waiting on the porch. My missing car battery sitting upright with a single glove laid neatly on top. They searched the woods for days, never found anyone. I sold the cabin that spring, haven't gone back since. Sometimes though, when the wind howls through the trees outside my apartment, I swear I can hear that same whistling again, distant, careful, patient.
I grew up in a small Alaskan town called Rime Hollow, the kind of place that disappears under snow for half the year and where everyone knows everyone else's business. Winters, there weren't just cold, they were silent. The kind of silence that made you hear things, creaks, whispers, footsteps that didn't belong to you. Most of us had stories. My grandfather used to tell one about the Snow Widow, a spirit that wandered the tundra looking for people who froze to death alone. She'd kneel beside them, whisper in their ear, and ask if they wanted to stay warm. If they said yes, she'd take them, their bodies found perfectly preserved, but their eyes gone. Of course, everyone said it was just folklore. Until the winter of 2019, that was when I stopped laughing at ghost stories. It began when my friend Jonah vanished. He was a local snowplow driver, always the first one out during storms. He lived just a few miles down from me, on an old logging road that curved around the lake. He'd radio in every morning before starting his route. One morning, he didn't. The town sheriff went out to look for him. They found his truck idling on the edge of the forest, door wide open, snow falling into the seat. The plow blade was buried halfway in the drift, engine running. Jonah's coat was still inside, along with his gloves and thermos, steam still curling from the cup. No footprints, just drag marks leading away from the truck into the trees. Everyone assumed wolves, but there were no blood trails, no fur, no struggle. Just that same eerie silence that hung over everything in Rime Hollow. That night, the wind picked up. Snow slammed against the cabin windows, and I swore I heard something moving outside, slow, dragging steps. I looked out through the blinds, and saw nothing but white. Then came the tapping, faint, rhythmic, like fingernails against glass. I pulled back the curtain, and my heart stopped. There was a face in the window. Pale as ice, eyes wide and cloudy white, lips cracked like frozen leather. The face didn't move, didn't blink, it just stared at me. Then it smiled, a stiff, unnatural stretch of skin. I jumped back. grabbed the rifle off the wall, and swung open the door, but there was no one there. Just snow falling into perfect stillness. I tried to tell myself it was the storm, the wind, my imagination. But when I looked down, I saw footprints, bare feet, leading away from my porch toward the lake. The next morning, the sheriff came knocking. Another person was missing, an older woman who lived near Jonah's route. Her house was found empty, doors unlocked, heater off. But the weirdest part, on the inside of her windows, drawn in frost, were words, "Stay warm." That night, the whole town lost power. I lit candles and huddled near the stove, but the temperature dropped so fast my breath looked like smoke. Then, somewhere out in the blizzard, I heard crying. At first it sounded like a woman, soft and broken. "Please, help me." I grabbed my parka and flashlight, knowing it was stupid but unable to ignore it. I stepped outside, the cold biting my lungs instantly. The voice came from the lake, a faint shape moving near the frozen surface. It looked like a woman in a long white coat, her hair whipping in the wind. She was barefoot. I shouted, "Hey, you need help." She turned her head slowly toward me, and even from that distance, I could see her eyes. Empty, colorless, like fog inside glass. She smiled, lips splitting from the cold, and said, in a voice that carried across the ice, "You look cold." Every instinct screamed at me to run. I stumbled backward, tripping in the snow. She started walking toward me, but her feet didn't sink. She moved over the snow like it wasn't there. I sprinted back inside, slammed the door, and threw the lock. I turned around, and she was already there, standing on the other side of the window, her breath fogging the glass from inside. The lights flickered on for just a second, and in that brief flash, I saw Jonah standing behind her, his face blue, his eyes gone. Then the lights died again. When morning came, everything looked normal. No footprints, no broken glass. Just my reflection in the window, and a faint outline of a handprint frozen into the pane from the inside. 2 more people went missing that week. Both found days later in the woods. Perfectly intact, eyes missing. Each one with the same frostbite pattern across their chest, like someone had held them tightly as they froze. The sheriff evacuated what was left of the town that spring. Most of us never went back. But every winter, when the storms roll over the mountains and the power lines crack under the ice, people in the next valley still report seeing her, a pale woman walking across the frozen lake, humming softly. Sometimes she stops at a window, cups her hands to the glass, and whispers through the frost, "Are you cold?" And if you answer her, you don't wake up warm.